Community Radio in the Catskills is supported by your generous ongoing donations and the following underwriters. Delaware County Solid Waste Management Center in Walton, open 7:30 to 2:30 Tuesday through Saturday for waste disposal and recycling, in service to make a difference by reducing pollution in Delaware County. Delaware County Solid Waste Management Center, State Route 10 in Walton, 607-832-5800. Or click the Delaware County Solid Waste Management Center link at WIOXradio.org. FNBC Construction and Cleaning in Margaretville for commercial and residential construction, cleaning, repairs, and maintenance services for houses, apartments, offices, universities, restaurants, warehouses, and supermarkets. FNBC Construction and Cleaning, 917-686-0283. 917-686-0283 or fnbccorp.com.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California, well, to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. I tell you, this land was made for you and me.
Hey, good morning, everyone. How are you today? This is Dennis, your host of Through the Looking Glass here on WIOX Community Radio Catskills at 91.3 FM and MTC Cable Channel 20. And you can hear us everywhere at WIOXradio.org. Folks, we have another fabulous guest today. Really happy to have back Ken McCarthy. Ken, in the early 90s, was one of the founders and pioneers of the commercial internet movement, and basically helped really make money off the internet and set the standard for that. And he's also written a host of books that are impressive, ranging from, we had him on last talking about his book, What the Nurses Saw During COVID, kind of an oral history report from inside the hospitals, which was very disturbing. He's written recently RFK, JFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism. He's written Kennedy, John Kenneth Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist, Genocide in Gaza, the Nuremberg Code, Fauci's First Fraud, How the Web Won, and other books too. So Ken, welcome back. And I know you're working on some new stuff now, as you always are. Really excited to hear about what your new work is. And, we've got a bunch of time, so just take it away, please.
Great. Well, thanks for having me back. And thanks for mentioning the book, How the Web Won. That's my story of life in San Francisco in the pre-digital age and what that was like. There are a lot of people that don't know what the pre-digital world was like because they were born into the digital world. So part of it's a story of what it was like to be, media, a writer, a conference producer, a marketer, all those kinds of things before the internet. And then it covers the work that I did. I did some pretty significant work. I'm one of the co-inventors of the banner ad. Life magazine says that I'm the person that figured out that clicks had a value, sort of fundamental stuff. And that's what I was doing 30 years ago. And now I'm 66, blessedly have some time on my hands now, and I'm putting what I think I know into books for the benefit of others. And right now, one of my focuses has been for the last 2 years, though I've been aware of the situation in Gaza since I was in my 20s. I mean, I grew up in New York City. I was an avid listener to WBAI. So there's no way one could listen to WBAI and not be very well informed about the situation in Palestine.
Absolutely.
So I created 3 books. One is Genocide in Gaza, The Evidence. And it's a very simple book. I wrote an introductory essay to sort of explain the historical context. And then we reproduced the complaint that the Republic of South Africa filed against the State of Israel in the International Court. I mean, that was one of the most important documents possible, and people would mention it, they'd refer to it, they'd talk about it, but nobody actually read it. Mm-hmm. and that's why we wanted it in hardcover form or hard form. You know, it's a paperback, but you know, you could hold it, you could underline it, you could read it, and you could understand that this was recognized as a genocide within months of it commencing. So that's that book. And then the next book that I wrote in that series.
Ken, just to respond quickly, I mean, I was telling my wife after a month, the international community has to stop this. We've never seen anything like this. This is just an industrial, sophisticated army shelling civilians in their homes. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know, we could maybe talk a little bit about that, but let me just explain the method to my madness. So, I had done work with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and was, like many people, shocked, amazed, disappointed, baffled by his position on all this. And if people aren't aware of it, he seems to be fine with it. So I reached out to him, you know, because I did have his cell phone number, and we've talked quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to hear about it, didn't want to talk about it, so on. So I thought, well, he's always talking about his family, and I would talk about my family too if my family was John and Robert Kennedy. And I said, look, you know, I said, look, he's a reader, he's a thinker. So the first book I did was John F. Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist, and I made the point that for all his flaws, and nobody's perfect, John F. Kennedy was an amazing president. And one of the reasons he was an amazing president was he was very consciously working against our unhinged imperialist activity around the world. And he started that program for himself when he was in his 30s and a congressman from Massachusetts. Yeah, I mean, there was no political gain for John F. Kennedy to say, hey, forget this Indochina thing, forget these things that the French are doing in Algeria. This all has to stop. But he did. So I wrote that book, and I made sure that he got a copy of it. It didn't move him. So then I said, okay, I got to go deep on this. And I had been vaguely aware for years that the Israelis had an unreported secret nuclear weapons program. And I started digging into it, and what I realized and was shocked to discover was that John F. Kennedy was aware of it and was fighting against it. Very clearly, and there are. This is not a matter of, oh, maybe this happened. It's historical speculation. Oh no, we've got the cables and the letters and the telegrams and so on. They were all classified until relatively recently, so nobody knew that in the summer of 1963, John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy was working on a different angle. He was trying to compel the Israeli government to register its various lobbying groups, and that's what they were very focused on those two things. And they were respectful, supportive. I mean, it wasn't belligerent on their part, but they're like, hey, you know, we don't want more nuclear weapons in the Middle East or anywhere. And two, you got to follow the law. So I wrote that book, and that's that book it's done pretty well. I was on a podcast for it a while back, and we're running up on, we're going to hit 1 million views on that podcast. So this understanding is now out there that the Kennedys were not rubber stamping everything Israel wanted to do. No. In fact, they were very upset with some of the things Israel was doing, and they were taking action to shut that down. So that's that bit of stream of my activity. I will say this: what's going on in Gaza, sadly, is not new. It's not new in Palestine. I mean, the scale and scope of it, and the fact that it's so visible is new. But I mean, 400,000 civilians died in Syria in a civil war that we and our allies were all in on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how many civilians died in Iraq? We just didn't see them die one by one because it wasn't so garish. But this stuff has been going on since the beginning of time, and it's mind-boggling. But maybe because it's so visible, one of the many things these martyrs are accomplishing is making the brutality of our system so undeniable that we can't pretend that it's not happening. And it's very easy when it's just, the occasional news bulletin that something is going on in Sudan or something's going on in East Timor. Or, it sounds bad, but we don't really know the details. Well, for the first time in history, we're seeing the details every day. And obviously it's on a scale and intensity that is probably unprecedented in human history. But it is more of the same that's been going on forever.
The military-industrial complex sort of.
Yeah. We use that phrase a lot, and which kind of brings me to my my new book, which is called Diabolical Error, and it's the working subtitle is The Strange and Unsettling History of Vaccine Science.
Oh, beautiful.
And this is a follow-up to my second stream of writing, which has to do with the medical system. Now, some people think our medical system's amazing, that doctors walk on water and routinely perform miracles, and there are wonderful doctors and nurses out there. And in fact, I'm amazed that anybody picks in that profession because it's so brutal to be in that profession. So and the quality of some of the practitioners is just extraordinary, But the system itself, I think, is clearly rotten to the core. And just like the situation in Gaza is shining a light on the, for lack of a better word, the military-industrial complex, COVID shined a light for anybody that had eyes to see that the medical-industrial complex is equally as dysfunctional and deranged, sinister, not good. Not good.
They have rewritten their own history to a surprising degree.
Well, it's so interesting, and that kind of it echoes on the military-industrial complex side. Because we always think, well, the U.S. has only been involved in good wars. World War II was such a no, we've been involved in countless wars, and when we personally haven't been involved, we've been funding the aggressors. And for instance, in the case of Israel, everybody. This is something we should all remind ourselves every day. That slaughter could stop today.
Yeah.
One person has to make a phone call and say, we're not sending you any more bullets.
Yeah.
And it's over.
Yeah.
They'll run out. So we have this. We have the military-industrial complex and the medical-industrial complex. So, as you know, I wrote a series of books. It started with a film.
Oh yes.
Film called Fauci's First Fraud.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very influential film on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s writing of Anthony.
The real Anthony Fauci.
The real Anthony Fauci.
Yep.
Yeah. It's footnoted over 50 times in the book. I'm credited personally in the acknowledgments. So he was going to touch on the Fauci's AIDS chicanery, but once he saw my film, it became a 5-chapter part of the book. It's like the core of the book.
It is really.
So I took the film and turned it into a book, and then, as you mentioned in the introduction, I became aware of some disturbing things that were going on in hospitals during COVID. I initially thought they were sort of one-off, one bad hospital, one bad ward. And then, I asked a nurse to connect me with other nurses. And next thing I realized, this was not only going on everywhere, this was systematic and it was vast. And that book is called What the Nurses Saw. And I'll just give you the numbers, folks. They say you always hear, well, I know people that died of COVID. Well, you should always ask them, where did they die? Did they die at home or did they die in a hospital? Because here's the numbers. 1.1 million people died of COVID, and 92% of them died in a hospital's care. And what the nurses saw is a documentation of what that care consisted of. And well, people can read the book, but long story short, I don't know why they did it the way they did it. I do know that they conceived what they did very carefully. I know that they enforced it ruthlessly. It was the most unhinged, insane collection of medical practices known to man. And it clearly killed a lot of people. The only question is how many. So when people say, I know someone that died of COVID, they may have died of their hospital. It's a big book. It's over 500 pages. It's extremely well documented.
It's a great, easy read too. And the nurses' stories are so powerful. You can see them these are professionals, many of whom came to the city and just could not believe what they were seeing and were terrified by it. And you captured that in your book.
And these were not just any old nurses. I mean, one had been literally a combat veteran, so a woman that's seen the world, not somebody naive. Another woman was an air nurse, like the kind of nurse that gets on a helicopter and goes to the mountains when there's a plane crash, and they've got to handle 50 severely injured people with one doctor, and one nurse, that kind of level of expertise. And they were the primary whistleblowers, and then they connected me to this whole network of nurses. And I'll say this, when somebody's in a hospital, every single thing that takes place is documented. Not because the hospitals are so diligent, but because they want to bill you for every breath you take. And so when I'm going to say this, folks, when a relative or a loved one dies in a hospital, you're entitled to the entire medical record of everything that happened while they were in the hospital. These documents can be huge. They can be 2, 3, 4, 5,000 pages long. Depending on the state. I don't know what the law is in New York State is, but in many states you're entitled to those documents. They give them to you in electronic form. However, if you have an attorney and the attorney asks for them, you'll be charged $1 to $2 a page. So that's a whole other story. Not the attorney charging you, but the hospital charges. But in many states, you're entitled to those records. And if you have any doubts or questions about what happened to a loved one in a hospital, before you get an attorney, you can get those records, and you might want to have them. And you might discover some things that are not pleasant. And this is one of the things I found out after I wrote the book, because the book was about the nurses, and as soon as I wrote the book, the families started contacting me. And that's when it got, as grim as that book is, the reality is maybe 10 or 100 times grimmer. I mean, the things that went on were unhinged. So I got that book out there, and now I'm like, okay, we've documented the problem. Now we need to figure out what the root of the problem is, and can we solve it? And so I started writing this book that it was initially just going to be about the history of vaccine science. And it is a history of vaccine science, but in order to tell the story of vaccine science, I have to talk about all kinds of issues that are not immediately directly related to vaccines. Because, for instance, one of the things that you find out, first of all, spoiler alert, when you try to find the roots of vaccine science, there's no there. It is all witchcraft and wishful thinking. And I document that ad infinitum. Every great breakthrough you've ever heard of in the history of vaccines and how they've saved the world, when you actually look under the hood, it's hot air, literally. And not surprisingly, every one of these breakthroughs just coincidentally happens to have had associated with it a world-class public relations operative. I'll give you one example.
Sure.
Pasteur. Oh, Louis Pasteur, great. All right, good guy on the industrial chemistry side. So, we went from, homemade or village-made food products to, food products made in factories. Well, once you start making food products in factories, you have to up the level of sanitation to a very high degree, because you're just dealing with lots of people and lots of materials and lots of so when our society, our civilization was making the transition from artisanal food production, locally done, to factory-made food production, a lot of mistakes were made. A lot of money was lost. A lot of spoiled products went out.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pasteur did figure out, okay, if you're going to do things on industrial scale, you got to pasteurize things, And so he made a great contribution there. But what people aren't aware of is he is the pioneer of vaccine science. He is the first person that stuck needles into somebody and said, I'm going to prevent this person from getting disease X. And when you hear, and I'll because I want to sell some books, when you hear the details of the story of what that actual breakthrough was, it's insane. It is literally, you'll read it, and I'm by the way, I'm not, there's no conspiracy theory in here. I'm not asking anybody to connect random dots and look at the picture in a weird way. I'm just reporting the actual history. Now, as you mentioned earlier, they tell their side of the story. So all that we learned in school was Pasteur was a great man and vaccines are awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we don't know, and this is really revelatory when I started researching the book, is that Louis Pasteur, there were a lot of great scientists in that era too. He wasn't the only one. And there were some better ones. A guy named Beauchamp was far more subtle and sophisticated in understanding human health, but he never became famous. The reason we know Louis Pasteur and not all those other scientists, many of whom were on different and more positive tracks than he was, is Louis Pasteur's son-in-law was one of the most politically connected people in the country of France at the time.
There we go.
His family was like literary giants. Like they were bestsellers, and not just like one member. He's like 3 or 4 members of his family who were top writers. His first job out of college was to be the personal assistant, the personal secretary to a man who ultimately became Prime Minister of France.
Oh, my goodness.
Right, so we've got a guy that's been, fantastically well-connected and well-positioned to make somebody into a superstar.
Sounds like Dr. Fauci.
You can't believe how many Faucis there have been in the history of medicine.
You're kidding.
And here's the formula. It's very simple. Get an MD. Never practice medicine. So you're not dealing with patients. You're not seeing people from beginning to end. You go off into a research area straight away, and then you hook yourself into a big bureaucracy with high-powered public relations, and you too will become a famous doctor. You'll become a there have been Faucis in the past. There have been people. In fact, there was. This is from the book. There's a guy. Oh, I'm going to forget his name. That's why I write books, so that I can remember all these names. But he ended up taking over the Morris Fishbein. Okay. He ended up taking over the Journal of American Medicine for like 20, 30 years. And he operated this thing like a gangster. So in other words, if you, and in negative sense, right? And so in other words, if you were a drug maker and you wanted, your reviews of your, papers on your drug published in the Journal of American Medicine, you best buy a lot of advertising. And you best buy Morris a round trip on the Queen Mary to England. I mean, he was that level of corrupt.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and by the way, we've all seen the crazy ads of a doctor saying, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend camels. You've seen those ads.
Yeah, of course.
That was Morris Fishbein.
You're kidding.
Those ads were running in the Journal of American Medicine.
Oh my.
So the formula is get an MD, never practice medicine, and then get a bureaucratic position.
Ken, let me push back then. All right. So the sacred cow for a lot of people with vaccines is Jonas Salk, the polio vaccine. Yeah. Now, is he Fauci-like too?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
And this is the chapter I'm working on right now. But hey, why not? We're talking. Let me give this away. All right. So infantile paralysis. So polio is a thing that strikes children, right? And it was called infantile paralysis. And there are disorders and conditions that can lead to infantile paralysis. We've had them since the beginning of time. Okay? However, we have never had epidemics of infantile paralysis until the late 19th century. Now, the medical historians like to say, oh, well, we weren't advanced enough to realize it. No, but baloney.
Right.
If we had whole villages of kids suddenly becoming paralyzed, that would have been known. It would have been in the Old Testament.
They do the same with autism. Oh, we just weren't looking for it then. No.
I mean, what a load of crap.
Yeah.
I mean, what a load of despicable falsehood, So there was never a case of epidemic infantile paralysis until the late 19th century, early 20th century. Now, it was interesting. I'll tell you the whole story. So the first time it came on the radar was in New York City. Mm. And where did it spring up? It sprang up in the slums of Brooklyn, where people were packed in like sardines, no light, no air, malnourished, raw sewage in the streets. And when I say raw sewage in the streets, I don't want to be gross, guys. There was no indoor plumbing in these tenements. Okay? Mm-hmm. So imagine the tenement packed with human beings, and there's no running water. Think it through. Mm. So these were very, very, very unhealthy environments. And there was one other element. And this is a name that's going to come up a lot in my book, the Rockefellers and the Rockefeller Medical Institute, or Institute for Medical Research. Mm-hmm. One of their people decided that the best way to deal with the unsanitary conditions of the slums, don't fix the water problem, don't give people fresh air and light, go in with caustic chemicals, spray the walls, spray the floors, spray the bedding. Okay? Turns out the chemicals they used have a neurotoxic component.
Oh, boy. Sort of like a DDT type of thing.
DDT on steroids. Mm. Okay? So they would come, they would mop the floors with this stuff, they'd paint the walls with it, they'd spray it on the bedding. Okay? Now, an adult might get sick. Child, they're small, they're going to absorb, they're close to the ground. Children crawl, they roll around, they're on the ground half the time.
They put their hands in the mouth all the time.
They put all that stuff. So the very first outbreak in the history of humanity of infantile paralysis took place in the slums of Brooklyn, where they were spraying and painting neurotoxins on every possible surface.
Oh, boy.
Okay?
Oh.
And then what did they do? One of these Rockefeller-funded scientists thought it would be a good idea to inject disinfectant directly into the cerebral spinal fluid of children to kill the pathogen.
Oh, my God. You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding you, dude. I'm reading this stuff, and I'm going, this can't possibly be right. So I'm double-checking it, checking it. I'm triple-checking it. I'm quadruple-checking it. Yeah, this is what they did. And it happens that this particular substance they were injecting into these kids' cerebral spinal fluid is a precursor to formaldehyde. Mm. So that's why I call that's why this section of the book is called. Actually, is it which part? No, I haven't written that part yet. Yeah, but it's witchcraft and wishful thinking. I mean, they literally were doing things that had all the sophistication of hocus pocus. And then they would declare victory. So that was the first outbreak of infantile paralysis on a community level in the history, recorded in all of human history. Okay. And we have Chinese records going back 4,000 years. Don't you think if there was an outbreak, a community-wide outbreak of infantile paralysis, that somebody in the vast mountains and mountains of literature that the Chinese collected over the millennia, they would have seen something like that before? They never had. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they went backwards and they said, oh, you know what? There was something like this that happened in Massachusetts and Vermont in the 19th century. that must have been the first outbreak, right? So they kind of went back. And indeed, there was an outbreak of like it didn't become a big deal because it was just so they didn't know what to make of it, so it didn't get reported.
This is also an early industrialized area of the country.
Well, here's what happened. So, we live in the Hudson Valley. I live in the fruit belt here, and I remember several years ago learning that there was a big plot of land in Red Hook, New York, that could not be developed until it was remediated. And the reason it had to be remediated was there had been an apple orchard on it. And I thought, well, what could be toxic about an apple orchard? Well, they used to spray lead and arsenic on apple trees in the 19th century.
Oh, boy.
Okay? So when I saw that the first outbreak of community outbreak of infantile paralysis took place in Massachusetts and Vermont, I thought, were they growing apples there? And indeed, they were growing fruit and apples and so on. And our I don't know what the proper name is now, but our gypsy moth, what do they call it now? Some other name. I don't remember it.
Yeah.
But the source of that is that was never a thing until the late 19th century. Some Frenchman came over here and decided he wanted to breed moths so that he could create a new and improved version of the silk moth, and then I guess he got distracted and lost interest, but the very powerful, healthy, voracious moth that he brought over from Europe took root in the United States. And when it initially took root, it went wild. Like now we kind of have figured out how to keep some control over it. I mean, these things would cover entire trees, like the entire tree, it was like a nightmare. They would cover houses. I mean, it was out of control. So what did they do? They got lead and arsenic and spray cans, hand pumped spray cans, because you didn't have aerosols in those days. And they went through the orchards and the houses and everything else that was covered with these moths and sprayed them. Who is going to get the brunt of that toxic exposure?
The sprayers.
It's going to be the sprayers and the little ones, the kids, eating the apples and rolling around the dirt and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what happened. So that's the root of polio. And then finally they said, well, this lead and arsenic isn't too good. Let's use this DDT stuff. And they had a problem. They were out in the tropics fighting, and there were mosquitoes and so on. They wanted to kill them, and the DDT seemed to work, and they used it. Some adults probably got sick from it, but didn't create massive neurological problems. By the way, lead, arsenic, all these things destroy your nervous system. And of course, if you're a little person and your nervous system is in the process of development and you're absorbing 10 to 100 times more of these toxins than an adult who has a developed nervous system, you're going to be the one that takes the brunt of it. So World War II's over, and we've got all these factories to make DDT. And people may not be aware of this, but this is in the book, and again, documented. It's I'm reading this stuff and I'm going, is somebody pulling my leg? This couldn't possibly have happened. They put DDT in everything. It was everywhere. I mean, people have probably seen, they're spraying the trucks going down the road, and they're spraying the town, and the kids are running out of it, running in and out of the spray. That was just the tip of the iceberg. So then we had not surprisingly, we had another flare-up of community infantile paralysis. Okay? Now, they stopped using DDT, and now the numbers of kids of kids getting this disorder is declining. Then they introduced the polio vaccine. And then they claim, we solved the problem with our vaccine. So that's the polio story, folks. And I'm not, like, you can say, well, maybe there's some real great science behind that. Okay, maybe there is. But here's the better science. Don't spray children with neurotoxins. Step one.
Well, I
Step one.
even remember I read Susan Humphrey's Dissolving Illusions in 2016, and I was shocked. The poster child of polio was FDR, Roosevelt, and she indicates that maybe he was swimming in Maine or New Hampshire on a Sunday night, and upstream from him was a tannery that had released a lot of the toxins into the river that evening, and he went for a swim, and they said that next morning is when his paralysis began. So, I mean, that's just one of her tales, but it got me thinking, there's a lot more going on here than we know about.
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's another issue with FDR having polio. Polio generally is not an adult disease.
Mm.
Okay, so that's red flag number one, and red flag number two is the speed of the onset. And yeah, and it did happen after swimming, and I didn't know that part. I'm going to add that to my book. I'm going to look into that. But we used to use bark for tanning, and that's why we have Tannersville, and people probably know that story. The whole Catskills was denuded of trees in order to, all the hemlock trees, in order to tan leather. I mean, all the like they would send hides from as far south as Cuba all the way up to here because we had that big supply. So they replaced the trees with all kinds of toxins. So yeah, I mean, I could see that. I once got deathly ill. I went swimming in Mexico, and unbeknownst to me, the sewage pipe had broken.
Oh boy!
That was about 3 months before I recovered from that. So luckily, it wasn't heavy metals. But if he had been hit with a serious dose of heavy metals and been exhausted, like overdid it physically, but so it's very possible, maybe even probable, that FDR never even had polio.
Right.
Now
folks, before you continue, Ken, I want to tell listeners who've just joined us recently that we're talking to Ken McCarthy. Ken was one of the original pioneers of the commercial internet movement. In fact, he co-sponsored the first conference on the subject of the web's commercial potential in 1994 with Netscape founder Mark Andreessen, and he's written a host of books from Dr. Fauci's First Fraud to the Kennedys to JFK Anti-Imperialists. He's working on a new one now, and this is a fabulous one called Diabolical Error, which we're discussing now, and it's sort of the history of vaccines. Is that how you describe it, Ken?
Yeah, the strange and unsettling history of vaccine science, and the thing that I've found is as I methodically go through all the milestones. But, by the way, these are the milestones that the advocates of vaccination, they trumpet these things as great triumphs. And as I methodically go through and get the actual facts, not conspiracy theory, not a weird, connecting of dots, and you have to look at it from this angle to see it that way, I just lay out the actual history of what actually they did. And the formula is, as we mentioned earlier, go to medical school, get an MD, never practice medicine, plug into some kind of big institution with a huge public relations arm, and you too can be America's favorite doctor. And any unhinged thing that you declare is medicine becomes medicine. I mean, that's literally the system we have. I mean, if you could, I don't doubt that if someone were to follow that formula and were to command that every human being had to stand on their head for an hour every day, or face, discipline at work, or you can't go to school, that would be enforced. That is how ridiculous and unscientific the system is. So going back to the polio story, there was a PR man, one of the greatest PR men in the history of PR. And you may have heard of something called the Creel Committee. This was World War I, and World War I was very different from World War II. Mm-hmm. We were really not attacked in World War I. Woodrow Wilson had gone, had run a campaign that we would not get involved in World War I. And next thing you know, we're in World War I. And a lot of Americans were not happy about it. They didn't really fancy seeing their sons taken to Europe and slaughtered. And so we became the first truly authoritarian, mentally authoritarian, psychological authoritarian state, long before the communists in the Soviet Union, long before the Chinese, long before the Nazis. And they brought in the most brilliant people they could find. They organized into something called the Creel Committee. They sat down with the top publishers of the day and said, look, we're all going to be reading from the same page here, okay? These guys are going to come up with the stories. You're going to publish them. And the U.S. news media went along with it. And that was one of the birthplaces. They birthed many people. One of them was Edward Bernays, who probably a lot of your readers are familiar with. But if you're not, the reason that women smoke, those that do, you can thank Edward Bernays for that. Because previous to Edward Bernays, way back in the 20s, women had the good sense to not smoke. They thought it was a disgusting, stupid habit. And they didn't do it. I mean, always a few people do, but it was not a thing.
Right.
Like it was, and so Edward Bernays was contacted by one of the big tobacco companies, and they said, Edward, Ed, we've maxed out on how many cigarettes we can sell, and we need to sell to women. That's the only way we can grow this market. So he engineered over a course of a year plus a very intricate, well-conceived publicity campaign that made smoking look glamorous and or be perceived as glamorous.
Didn't he tie it in also with the suffragette and women's independence movement?
Yeah, so what he did, and this has been done many times since. In fact, in a way, the COVID thing was a very, very similar formula. He went out and he found an active group that was, promoting something positive, which was voting rights for women, professional rights, and all these things, very important. And he somehow persuaded them that smoking would be part of that complex of rights that women should demand. We want the right to vote. We want the right to attend universities. We want the right to work in professions. And we want the right to smoke. I mean, completely irrational. But as you learn, when you study these things, these people, these public relations people, deal in irrationality. They're looking for the irrational buttons to push because, unfortunately, those buttons are very powerful. So what he did was he had a bunch of suffragettes who were marching in the Easter Day parade in New York. And it's hard to imagine, but in the 1920s, there's no TV, there's no internet. There's really no even radio. There's just newspapers and silent movies. So things like parades are a very big deal, right? And the Easter parade in New York City, I mean, that's the biggest of all big deals. So what he did was he had the women stop right in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, pull out cigarettes, a shocking thing, and light them up and hold them up. And then he told the press, and he had the press there because he knew all the press people. He had them positioned, and they were snapping photographs, of all these women smoking cigarettes. And he whispered the word into their ear, call them torches of liberty. And that is why if you have a aunt or a mother or a grandmother who died of lung cancer or a cancer related to smoking, you can thank Edward Bernays for engineering that, because otherwise women just didn't smoke because they were too smart. But he made it glamorous, and that's like all of us. We're all vulnerable to things that we think are glamorous. And once he made that link between smoking and glamour, we had tens of millions, hundreds of millions of women picking up smoking as a bad habit. So one of Edward Bernays' colleagues is the guy that ran the March of Dimes and that March of Dimes thing. It was lovely. It was beautiful. It's like everything. There is a positive human impulse to do good, and so what they did was they hijacked it, and you cannot imagine at its height how big that movement was when it was big. So one of the things that this guy cooked up was the following: every birthday of FDR, and FDR was very popular, communities all over America would host balls to celebrate FDR's birthday because they were into FDR. And the purpose of the balls was to raise money for the March of Dimes and to find a cure for polio. Okay? So we had like tens of thousands of local events all over the country, year after year after year, beating the drum that there's a thing called polio. It comes out of the blue. We have no idea what it is. We have no idea how to treat it. We have no idea how to prevent it. Give us money and we'll find a cure.
Your dimes will stop it.
Your dime, exactly. And so, and hey, there are children that need help. And it's a good impulse to for the community to raise money to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of this thing that they called polio, that they said was caused by a virus, every time you find outbreak, and when were the outbreaks? The outbreaks were always in the summer. When are kids out of school, running around outdoors, rolling around the dirt and all that kind of stuff? In the summer. When are they spraying DDT? In the summer. I mean, it's so predictable. But there was this, and again, let's look at COVID. Utter nonsense, scientifically bankrupt, complete fraud from day one. And I will say February 1st, 2020, but when it was still in China, I said this is an obvious vaccine marketing campaign. This is going to end, and I even said it's going to end up with a new style of vaccine, and they're going to use more speed than science. Those are exact quotes. Okay? By the way, my account is still frozen on Twitter. I can't post to it.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But which does me a favor in a sense because that they didn't just cancel me. You can read. I started talking about this. I started talking about COVID, what it was, and what a scam it was. And I went all in February 1st, 2020. And I turned out I happen to have been right.
You mean the people dropping dead on the sidewalk in China when they put their hands out to break the fall didn't fool you?
I mean, listen, let's say you take Wuhan. Wuhan has 11 million people. We barely have, I think New York is, and maybe L.A., that's it. We don't have cities like that, right?
Right.
If you have closed circuit TVs all over the city, on every light pole, in every store, on every street, with 11 million people, you're going to see some crazy stuff. You're going to see people faint.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see people just spontaneously pass out. So what they did was they got that footage, they put a little frame around it and said, this is the dreaded COVID. It just kills you in your tracks. Unbelievable.
Yes,
and yet,
go ahead.
Yes,
Go ahead.
And yet
That's an early time to see that it was not real. That's pretty impressive.
Well, I am a student of chicanery and public relations. I mean, I'm an armchair historian of it. When Edward Bernays died, all his papers and books went to, I forget what, one of the universities, but he had a bunch of duplicate books in his library, and those were sold by a book dealer in Boston. And I bought up a ton of those books. I mean, that's how into it I am. So I assume if it's on the front page of the New York Times, it's a blatant lie, and somebody's running a scam. I just assume that. Right. And I've rarely been wrong. If it appears in the back pages, it might be accurate. If they're reviewing a restaurant, if they're talking about a dance performance, they're probably more or less accurate. But if it's corporate, if it's geopolitical, no, they're running.
Now, Ken, why is that? Because a lot of people listening, read the New York Times and feel like it's sort of, I wouldn't call it their Bible, but it's a guiding light for them. And you're saying that, the front page, when they need something to push people in certain directions that they wish them to go, that's what they use, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you're not getting on the front page of the New York Times casually. That's certainly not going to happen. I think the two examples, one we were talking about earlier in the call. Still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yep.
Oh, good. Sorry. Something just dropped out on my end. Something we were talking about earlier in the call, Gaza. I mean, the New York Times, now occasionally they'll give us a glimpse of the horror, but for the first many months, it was always presented as, we're fighting Hamas. So there's an example of the New York Times getting it completely wrong on the behalf of somebody they favor. They favor Israel.
Well, I start my daily delivery of the Times to my door after the weapons of mass destruction debacle, which they just pushed so hard.
Yeah, there's another example. I mean, that was the actual weapons inspectors who were on the ground said there aren't any weapons here, and the New York Times decided, no, we're going to give people the opposite view of that. And then another example of the New York Times falling down is, I mean, they're still cheerleaders for COVID. I mean, they're ready to have it come back tomorrow, which is why I'm doing all this, is they can put the key in the engine, turn it, and start that engine up again tomorrow if they feel like it.
Yep. I mean, Hitler said it, just a whiff of fear out there, and all the sheep run to the shepherd, you know? We all follow the leader of the state.
And what's so interesting, and this is becoming clear to me as I'm writing this book, the state and the medical state are, I mean, I had this sense in the last several years that we're living under a medical dictatorship. And, I mean, hey, if they can declare you can't go to church, you can't go to a store, you can't go hear music, you can't go to school.
Can't get a cup of coffee.
Yeah. If they can declare that based on nothing, I don't even know a dictatorship in the history of humanity that ever tried to pull that off. But now I'm really realizing as I write this book, I went in search of the science. I found no science. But what I found is that not only is there always a PR person, a genius PR person affiliated with all of these so-called milestones, but there is the heavy hand of government. And in our country, the government is really the corporate government. And so behind the government are really corporate interests. And in some cases, they're just being stupid. But in other cases, they have an agenda. They have an agenda. And in terms of health, it's easier to drug people to mask symptoms and or inject them with the witchcraft, wishful thinking idea that it's going to prevent illness than it is to cure the basic problems, which are pollution, bad air, for some people, bad water, toxins in our environment, toxins in our food, widespread ignorance about what leads to health and what leads to disease.
No, it makes so much sense what you're saying, Ken. It's just when there's money to be made, they're there. You know, Dr. King, when he wanted to share toilet seats, blacks and whites, New York Times loved him. You know, it didn't cost the rich anything. As soon as he said anti-war and anti-poverty, all right, now you're challenging the system. And, yeah,
exactly. He had to go. You can go down the line. Malcolm X, he was Nation of Islam. You know, go ahead, do that, Malcolm. That's fine.
Yeah.
When he came back from the Middle East and said, you know what, maybe the white man isn't the devil. Maybe the system's the devil.
That's it. Capitalism versus melatonin.
Yeah, and then look at, I think an amazing example of this and is the guy who's very rarely mentioned and really should celebrate him on his birthday every time it comes around is the young Fred Hampton in Chicago. And he murdered in bed with his pregnant partner, his girlfriend next to him. What was his great sin? He was bringing black and white people together. In Chicago.
And he was eloquent and brave and only 21.
Yeah. They got his nut and they said this cannot be allowed. I don't know if you recognize the name Judy Berry. Does that ring a bell?
No, that one doesn't.
Okay. So California, Northern California, the Great Redwoods, they were chewing up the redwoods just to make money. Made no sense. It was just a quick buck for the people doing it. Some guy had taken out a lot of junk bonds, and he had to pay them off, and so he had this he somehow came into control of these vast swaths of redwood forest, and he was just devastating them just so he could pay his junk bond interest payments. It made no financial sense beyond that. So Judy Berry went, and there was like this, there were the hippies, if you think Woodstock is hippie, man, you should go to Garberville. Oh, man, it's unbelievable. But I don't know what it's like now, but when I used to go up there in the 90s, the 60s had not ended yet, So you had those folks, and they had their point of view, which is they loved nature and they didn't want it destroyed. But then you had the mill workers, and they're like, hey, we need work, man. So there was this battle between these two. They were at odds with each other. And Judy Berry came up, musician, speaker, and she said, hey, wait a minute, guys. First of all, stop fighting. Second of all, mill worker brothers. Yes, you're in the mill today, but they're cutting these trees down so fast that within 3 or 4 years, you're not going to have a job ever again. Your children are never going to have a job. No one's ever going to have a job up here in the forestry industry. So that's why we're asking them to go slow. And the mill workers were like, oh, I get it. And she was having these rallies. The hippies were coming. The mill workers were coming. And then the FBI did a what do you call it? Training camp on how to detect car bombs.
Oh, boy.
Okay? And then a couple of weeks later, Judy Berry's car blew up down in Berkeley. And then they arrested her for conveying a bomb. So anyway, and so her great sin, and this is the great sin of anybody that gets a high profile who's talking sense, is you're not allowed to talk sense. You're allowed to talk. You're allowed to hold the flag for one side of the argument. You're never allowed to say, let's all get together and look at who's really causing the problems here. And going back to the fact that all this sort of traces back to, it's not just the medical system, which is just dysfunctional and corrupt beyond human comprehension. And a lot of doctors and nurses will tell you that. And again, I want to hats off to the ones that have stuck with it. And,
absolutely.
As I'm writing this book, I have a whole chapter on what it takes to become a doctor in the United States. It's insane what they put these people through.
They're like
good reason.
They're on medical assembly lines basically now.
Well, it's so bad. I don't want to get too off track on that, but let's say they to become a doctor in this country, not in Europe where they have better health outcomes. But it's not like they're being put through hell and therefore we get better trained doctors. They're just simply put through hell for purposes for reasons that are a little complicated to explain right now. But the point I want to make is it's the medical system, but it's the government, and the people behind the government are the money people, the big money people. And I spent a lot of time talking about Pasteur in the book, because Pasteur's original job, and I referred to this earlier in the call, was, hey, we're starting to work. Food is biological. We're starting to do this biological work on a vast scale. Everything used to be done in the household or done by the village, guy, and they could keep things clean and keep things healthy, just as a matter of course, because the scale was small and they were eyes on. But once you go to factory level, the biological problems become very severe. So the thing that he did was he identified that, and he put some science behind why you need to clean things, for example, in a factory, in a food factory. But but basically he was the and the very first project he worked, one of the many projects he worked on too was silk moths. That may seem like, hey, what's this all about? I thought we were talking about medicine. Silk moths, believe it or not, were the first factory farms. Okay? The first time anybody in history, and the Chinese invented it and then it came to France, it was the first time in history that anybody put a whole bunch of beings into some super crowded, compressed space for the purpose of producing stuff. And as soon as they did that on an industrial scale in France, all the moths started dying. Okay? So the point I want to make is there is a healthy way for human beings to live. It's not crowded, it's getting fresh air, very important, clean water, healthy activity, food that's not toxic and filled with all kinds of bad chemicals. and so on and so forth. Once you start packing anything, any living beings into unhealthy spaces, believe it or not, they get sick, right?
Oh, yeah.
And to say that that's an epidemic, it's like, oh, I hit somebody with a hammer on the head, and now they're suffering from idiopathic head
migraine
syndrome. Yeah, and you forget that somebody hit him on the head with a hammer.
Oh my God, Ken! Speaking of hammers.